The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.
I would like to suggest, I'd like to encourage you, clean the slate in your mind, in your brain, from all the static, all the reporting, all the commentary that's been going on. Just clean the slate. And just listen to me for a moment. You can accept or reject what I say, obviously. The President of the United States has already effectively seized core authority from the Congress, in particular the House of Representatives. And he's done it over the last few days once the Senate Republicans stepped in, undermined a fairly weak proposal, the fourth or fifth or sixth proposal from the House Republicans, but nonetheless they stepped in and they were seeking to cut a deal with Harry Reid being Obama's point man. The President of the United States has already done, in addition to his previous acts against the Constitution, but in this act, his most dangerous and destructive assault on the constitutional order. Let me explain. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 2 of the Constitution empowers Congress and only Congress, quote, to borrow money on the credit of the United States, unquote. Clearly, then, Congress has a say in the debt. It not only has a say in the debt, it must authorize the debt. It must authorize increases in the debt. There is no debate about it. It is unequivocal. There is no other part of the United States Constitution, none, that empowers the executive branch to undertake that authority. None. None. This is a core function of Congress, particularly the House of Representatives. And without control over that function, it ceases to be the people's body. You know, Obama likes to say that he was elected, and therefore he has this power and that power and whatever power. Actually, he only has the power that the Constitution grants him, no more. And you're elected in order to exercise power within the limits of the Constitution. You're not elected in order to exercise power outside the limits of the Constitution. The Constitution isn't up for election when we elect public figures. The Constitution doesn't change. It is up to the human beings that we send to Washington to comply with the Constitution, not change it unilaterally. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 2 empowers Congress and only Congress, quote, to borrow money on the credit of the United States. All this talk about the 14th Amendment is, as I've said before, utter nonsense. Section 4 of the 14th Amendment says, quote, the validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law, including debts incurred for payment of pensions and bounties for services in suppressing insurrection and rebellion, shall not be questioned. What that means is the interest and principal that is owing on our debt shall not be questioned. That is, it must be paid. It must be paid. And hence, it must be paid first. And so when the first dollar comes in from we, the taxpayers, there must be enough money to cover that interest and principal. And of course, as we've discussed many times, including several years ago, the revenue each month into the federal government is 10 times the amount of the interest and principal owed in any given month. So it can be covered. As I've explained many times, several years ago and several weeks ago and yesterday, and I want to explain again today, the president has no power whatsoever as the head of the executive branch to borrow money on the credit of the United States, quote unquote. That is an explicit function of Congress, and only Congress. And the 14th Amendment doesn't change that, and no president of the United States has ever asserted that it changes that. And no president of the United States has ever exercised Section 4 of the 14th Amendment to mean that they can usurp core congressional authority. Representative Tom McClintock, Republican of California, made a floor speech today. It's almost 5 minutes. And he gets it completely. And he understands completely that not only if the president exercises this power, but by threatening to default the nation, that is, by threatening to violate his oath, by threatening to violate the 14th Amendment, Section 4, that is, by constantly talking about how the nation is going to go into default, how the economy is going to shut down, the president is, in effect, seizing authority from the Congress, and he has succeeded. It's being done right in front of our faces. They're missing it over there at the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal. They're missing it over there in many cases on the Fox News channel. They're missing it at National Review and the Weekly Standard and all these other places. But we're not missing it. We see it. And I keep bringing it up because now even if Congress even if Congress accedes to the president's demands and gives him 90, 95, or 100% of what he insists on, under threat of forcing this country into default in violation of his oath and the 14th Amendment, he will have neutered Congress. He will, in essence, have succeeded in instituting a coup of sorts, as I said the other week and several years ago. This is not said to be provocative or controversial. It's said because it's true. Mr. Producer, how much time do I have left in this segment? I want you to listen to an extraordinary statement by Representative Tom McClintock of California. I really want you to turn up the volume and listen to this man, because he gets it, and he's one of the few who does. Here he is on the floor of the House of Representatives yesterday. Hat tip, Breitbart, cut one, go.
The debt limit exists for a simple reason: to assure that public debt isn't recklessly piled up without Congress periodically acknowledging it and addressing the spending patterns that are causing it. If the debt limit increase is supposed to be automatic, as the president suggests, then there's really no purpose to it. Now, a new dimension has now appeared in this discussion. Unlike every one of his predecessors, this president has vowed that unless Congress unconditionally raises the debt limit, the United States will default on its sovereign debt. But a failure to raise the debt limit would not by itself cause the nation to default. The Government Accountability Office has consistently held that the Treasury Secretary has, quote, the authority to choose the order in which to pay obligations of the United States to protect the nation's credit. Such authority is inherent in the 1789 Act that established the Treasury Department and entrusted it with, quote, the management of the revenue and, quote, the support of the public credit. The affirmative duty of the Treasury Department to do so is underscored by the 14th Amendment. Our revenues are more than 10 times our debt payments, so paying the debt first to prevent a sovereign default is well within the financial ability of the federal government. Indeed, it is a fiscal imperative. Now, earlier this year, the House passed H.R. 807, which not only explicitly requires the payment of the national debt in the case of an impasse over the debt limit, but even allows the president to exceed the debt limit itself in order to protect the nation's credit. That measure languishes in the Senate under the threat of a presidential veto. Protecting the sovereign credit by prioritizing payments would mean delaying paying other bills. That is also untenable, unthinkable, and something much to be avoided. But it would not imperil the nation's sovereign credit. Only the president can do that. The House leadership met with the president last week and offered to extend the debt limit until November 22nd with no strings attached. The president refused. Senate Republicans offered a 6-month extension, but the Senate Democratic leader refused. What the president threatens to do would be catastrophic and unprecedented. The full faith and credit of the United States is what gives markets the confidence to loan money to the federal government. Even a threat of default, exactly the kind the president is now making, could have dire consequences to a nation that now owes more than its entire economy produces in a year. So where do we go from here? Republicans have miscalculated on two key assumptions. First, that the Democrats would negotiate the issues that divide our country. They have not. Second, that Democrats would seek to minimize the suffering caused by the impasse. They have not. Given the ruthless and vindictive way the shutdown has been handled, I now believe that this president would willfully act to destroy the full faith and credit of the United States unless the Congress acquiesces to all of his demands, at least as long as he sees political advantage in doing so. If the Republicans acquiesce, the immediate crisis will quickly vanish, credit markets will calm, and public life will return to other matters. But a fundamental element of our Constitution will have been destroyed. The power of the purse will have shifted from the representatives of the people to the executive. The executive bureaucracies will be freed to churn out ever more outlandish regulations with no effective congressional review or check through the purse. A perilous era will have begun in which the president sets spending levels and vetoes any bill falling short of his demands. Whenever a deadline approaches, one house can simply refuse to negotiate with the other until Congress is faced with the Hobson's choice of a shutdown or a default. The nation's spending will again dangerously accelerate, the deficit will rapidly widen, and the economic prosperity of the nation will continue to slowly bleed away. This impasse may have started as a dispute over a collapsing health program, but it's now taken on the dimensions of a constitutional crisis. Yesterday in Washington, a group of America's veterans rose up to take a stand against these unconstitutional usurpations. I believe the salvation of our nation now ultimately depends on the American people joining them.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this is now about more than Obamacare. That was bad enough what the president was doing to us. This is now about even more than a continuing resolution, shutting down part of the government, or even the debt ceiling. This president of the United States is threatening to violate the 14th Amendment, if not Article 1. That is to drive this nation into intentional default. And this is why I've played clip after clip after clip of him and his supporters talking about default. He is prepared to do it. What could be better to fundamentally transform America? And he's also used the Saul Alinsky trick of changing the language and applying it against his opponents. You see, it is Obama who rejects the Republican majority in the House. It is Obama who seeks to destroy the House's core constitutional power. It is Obama who does not accept the fact that there is divided government. And it is Obama who is holding the nation ransom if his demands are not met, and met absolutely. If this is not a coup, if this is not an effort to eviscerate what's left of the Constitution, then what the hell is?
Mark Levin.
The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.